Sunday morning before the state conference, I got a call and came in and talked with who I found out was the new stake president, was asked to be a stake clerk. And was a little surprised, but accepted the assignment and went to work to try to find out about being a stake clerk. Well, I'd been there 2 or 3 years and started hearing about this system called MLS. And the system we had at the time for keeping track of membership and finance, there were actually 2 systems, were pretty antiquated. So we got excited, and I had an assistant clerk in the stake who had some technology savvy, and so we decided we wanted to go to MLS. Well, we found out the church said, well, that's great, but you have to have computers that meet these specifications, and oh, by the way, the church isn't going to help you get them. So we looked around and found somebody that was upgrading their computers, and the computers they were upgrading from met the specification. And so we got computers for all of our ward and spread them around. We got MLS and put it in, and it was an exciting adventure. A year later, the church said, we're giving you computers for MLS. So we took it off all the old computers, put it on the new computers. And so I found out a big part of being a job as stake clerk was training ward clerks on how to use these new computer systems. And so being in Georgia, we're kind of 2 hours away in time zones, and calling the helpline all over and over again, you really only wanted to do in emergencies. So I started looking around for places to learn how to use this software. And after a while, I started running across these forums. And I found out there were stake clerks all over the church that were running into problems, and they were having discussion groups and letting us know. And eventually that turned to I found this thing called Lds Tech. And that was kind of a focus for the forums. And then towards the end of the time I was a stake clerk, they started talking about projects and things like that. And I thought, wow, this is really different from when I started as stake clerk. And I looked at the plans and the things they were working on. I said, this is really, really great. And sometime in that period, I started getting newsletters about 4 times a year from a guy named Tom Welch. And he would update us on what the church was doing and things like that. So as we looked at what we could bring as a speaker tonight and discussed on our board, I brought up Tom Welch's name. I'd never even talked to Tom Welch, but I had read a lot of the things he was doing. And as we talked on the board, we thought this might be something interesting both to those of us that are chemical engineers and those of us that are closely related to chemical engineers but may not have the love for fluid mechanics and heat transfer that chemical engineers do. Tom Welch was the manager of the LDS technology community and really helped create a technology web that harnesses the expertise primarily of church members, but I think there are even some people who aren't members of the church in bringing new IT solutions to the church. Prior to joining the church, he was the CTO for Linsphere, which was and did a lot with open source there in the Linux operating system. He's an entrepreneur. He founded and was president and CEO of a company called Axiom that was later sold, and prior to that was director of technology for Franklin Covey and was one of the people involved with the Franklin Planner software. He just got back from an 8-year opportunity in Germany. The church gave him a leave of absence, and he was working on a project there having to do with digital library and being able to get books from a library instead of bringing it home in your hand. You can bring it home on your iPad or your other reader. His wife Holly and 4 children live in the area, but we're happy to have Tom Welch speak to us and tell us a little bit about some of the things the church is doing to use people who are interested in helping in bringing better software solutions to the church. Tom? Oh. We'll do a little computer change and a microphone change. That's wrong.
I don't, but I'm going to see if I can just use this microphone and be a little bit more mobile. That's okay. Can everybody hear me? I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm afraid that if they would have known that the only way I could pass chemistry in high school was to join the swim team, because the chemistry teacher was the swim teacher, or the coach for the swim team, I think they wouldn't have invited me here today. My wife, I have to say, my wife, she said, she leaned over to me and says, you know, this group of people is just kind of like programmers. So I don't know if that's you should be insulted or flattered. I don't know. But it's good to be here today. I'm excited about talking about the LDS Tech community. It's been a passion of mine for years. In fact, just let me give you a little history. I started doing work for the church not as an employee, but actually as a volunteer back in the 90s. Does anybody ever have an easy reader software where you could read the scriptures on the Palm Pilot? That was me that did that back in the middle 90s. And actually, I can't take the credit. It was actually done by a kid, a graduate student from North Carolina. He did the original easy reader and wanted to go on his mission. So he donated the code, and the church paid him, or not the church, but Deseret Book at the time paid him like $5,000, and that's what he used for some of his mission funds. And so I got this code. They gave it to us to kind of do some work on it, and I got the code, and it didn't work on most Palms. It worked on the original Palm Pilot, and the company that I owned at the time, we actually took that software and developed it, and then we donated it to the church, which became the easy reader. We had the scriptures on it. And it was wildly successful. A lot of people, in fact, I still get emails saying, can I get a copy of the easy reader? Which, you know, whoever has a Palm that's that old, I feel bad for them, but but I guess, you know, it's good to be around. Go ahead and go to the next one. So our inspiration for LDS Tech, you guys probably have all heard the story of John Roe Moyle. Go ahead and advance it. John Roe Moyle was a pioneer that lived here in Alpine. He was a farmer. Just go ahead 2 more times. But he was the brother that lost his leg in an accident on his farm. At the time, he was serving as a worker on the Salt Lake Temple. And he walked from Alpine to Salt Lake every week and worked on the temple, and then came back and did work on his farm on the weekends. And actually was in a farm accident, lost his leg, and he continued to work after he made his own prosthetic leg. He continued to work as a stonemason at the temple, and he is the one that carved Holiness to the Lord, the piece on the temple that you see there. His service was an inspiration to me and to our group at the church as we really started this whole endeavor. Go ahead. So I'm going to, if this microphone will reach, I'm going to play a video. Let's go back one. Yep, and it's...
Likely could never build a hall large enough to accommodate all who would wish to assemble in one place. Nor would accelerating travel costs make possible their coming. The gifts of science have provided a more convenient way. We are confident that as the work of the Lord expands, He will inspire men to develop the means whereby the membership of the church, wherever they may be, can be counseled in an intimate and personal way by His chosen prophets. Communication is the sinew that binds the church as one great family. Between those facilities which are now available and those which are on the horizon, we shall be able to converse one with another according to the needs and circumstances of the time.
So I'm sorry that wasn't real loud, but that was President Hinckley back in 1981, and he was basically prophesying what we now know as the internet. He was talking about how he saw communication capabilities becoming the way that we'll communicate as a church. And of course, in 1981, the internet really wasn't around, at least from a perspective of users around the world using it. But he saw that. And so, that vision inspired us as well, because really, what we did with LDS Tech and what we're doing today absolutely could not happen without the communication technology that's available today. To give you a little bit of background, the church first got involved with technology back in 1962. It actually started in 1959 when some university students at UCLA, who are members of the church, they started using some computers there at the university, and they said, man, there's a lot that the church could do with computers. And they actually went and had a meeting with the First Presidency and shared with them what they could do. They actually wrote a little sample program. Of course, they couldn't bring a computer with them, but one of the comments from one of the brethren was that they came to the meeting and they said, you know, we can actually sort 50,000 records in 5 minutes. You know, and they were thinking, this is for genealogy, great. And you know, it took the church some time to really understand how they could utilize that. And so the first things that the church did was really to implement the computers in the church as for accounting and financial purposes. It was later that they fully was able to use it for more of the genealogy. And in fact, your church bought a computer and actually time shared it out with other institutions. Back in those days, computers were very expensive, very big, and so they bought a computer and then they actually leased time to other companies such as the Primary Children's Hospital and so forth, and actually operated in this role for several years. So the church got involved fairly early with computers. They could see the value and the need of computers and how that could benefit it. But the church also, about 7 years ago, started thinking, how can we leverage more of the community out there to help us? So this graph here, go ahead and push the space bar. This graph is just a rough representation of the growth of the church. Now, if you think about the growth of the church, especially in the last 50 years, it's grown quite a bit, exponentially. The problem is at church headquarters, we cannot hire at the same level as we're converting people. It's not practical and prudent. So that was where kind of the impetus of this came for. How can we do more for less? It's the Lord's money. It's sacred money. We have to figure out how can we make that money extend further. And that's where the whole concept of LDS Tech came ahead. So, go ahead. So, in 2006, they hired me and said, let's come up with an idea of how could we really harness a community. We had nothing. We had no way to communicate with people. The church had their official channels, which the First Presidency and some of the brethren used to communicate to members, but we really didn't have a way for the church members to really gather as a community. And so one of the first things we did was to create a forum. The goal was to leverage the talents of people around the world to help us with technology. We first needed a place for them to gather. So the very first thing we did is created a forum. Now this was a big challenge for the church because not that the church didn't believe in this concept, but it was really new. I mean, there was never a place where you could go and just talk about what you wanted to talk about in a public setting that wasn't, somewhat filtered. And there was a lot of concern early on that, well, what if people go on these forums and they say bad things? Or what if non-members get out there and say bad things? And I'll tell you some stories about this, but it's, that was a big challenge that when we first started, we had to go and show them. And there was a leap of faith that we had to take that says, okay, we're going to go do this. We're going to really trust the community to help us police this. So we set up some forums, and we immediately called volunteer people from the community to help us police the forums. We call them moderators. And we actually have about 25 moderators, and they spend a tremendous amount of time on our forums making sure that people don't post bad things. It's happened. We've had people, especially enemies of the church, go and post, come buy cell phones here, come buy software for cheap here, even sometimes worse things. But these forum moderators are so dedicated, and they're from all around the world. They are so dedicated that information doesn't stay long on the site and is usually taken off. In fact, one of the stories I'd like to share is back in 2008, there was exploit with the forum software that we used. It's a very popular forum software. There was an exploit that allowed hackers to go in there and hack and use computer robots to post a bunch of bad stuff on these forums. It wasn't just our forums, it was all the forms software that use this. And when it happened about 10 o'clock at night. And all of a sudden, what happened is we started getting tons of bogus registrations from these computer robots posting bad stuff. And we had forum members stay up all night watching for those, and as soon as they'd come on a new one, they'd hurry and delete them. And they stayed up all night until we came up with a solution. Our solution, by the way, was very simple. Instead of using all these high-tech CAPTCHA things that make you type in weird numbers, we just asked a simple question: how many articles of faith are there? Stopped it cold. We went from having about 200 to 300 per hour to nothing. We had no bogus registrations. It's funny because they could do a Google search and find out that answer, but it stopped it cold. But anyway, it's the power of the community. They went and did a tremendous job. So the forums were set up, and the purpose of the forums was to help clerks and state technology specialists get help in technology issues in their ward. And so we set it up. Go ahead and push the slide. To date, we have about 8,312 threads. Those are separate conversations going on. We have 66,989 individual posts, 17,668 members on the forums, and it's 100% community moderated. The church doesn't do anything other than keep the server running. It's a tremendous asset for the church. In fact, one of the first customers of this particular product was the clerk support group at the church. They were able to now utilize the forums to support people who called in, and they could point them to areas, and their call volume went down. So they were able to do more with less. So the forums have been tremendous. So the next step was, okay, well, we've got forums, we've got people making some discussions, doing some really good stuff around, helping each other out. But really, our goal was to also have people help us write software. But before we can write software, we needed to have a place where we could document what that software needs to do. So we decided to have a wiki. And I remember when I first proposed the idea of a wiki, one of our managers says, his comment was, "Wikis are icky." But it's, that was, again, we had to overcome this concept of we've got to really trust the community to do the right thing. Everybody knows about Wikipedia and how successful that's been, and there's been a lot of controversy around it. And so there was a lot of concern at the church about, again, a wiki going out of control, people posting doctrinal things out there that they shouldn't. It wasn't supposed to be a doctrinal wiki. We were really concerned about that, but we were able to work with the proper channels at the church and to get their comfort level. And so what we did is we said, well, we really want to focus the wiki on technology projects and support issues. So we actually went out there, and there was a brother out there in the community that was actually running his own wiki. And it was, I think the URL was ldsclerks.org or something like that. But he had a little wiki out there, and he had actually compiled a lot of information about clerking in the church, different things. So we went and contacted him and said, hey, can we just take all your content and put it on a church wiki? And he was gracious and said, sure, absolutely. And so that's where we set up the wiki, and that's where we initially populated the wiki with all these great clerks articles. And it started to really grow. And in fact, we actually were able to successfully test other types of crowdsourcing with the wiki. For example, the translation department says, we want to publish this document about how to Ward Meeting House Internet appliance. We want to have that published in Spanish and Portuguese. Do you think the community can help? So we actually went out and put a wiki page for the Meeting House Internet technology. And we actually put a call. I sent out a bulletin to our community members and said, we need help translating this into Spanish and to Portuguese. And within 2 hours, we had the Spanish already translated, and I think it took a day to get the Portuguese translated. So it showed the power of people out there who got this and said, oh, I can speak Portuguese or Spanish or whatever, and they just all come and collaborated around the language versions, and now we're getting much more language content on our wiki. Now the concern that the church had obviously was, we don't want everything translated by the community. It's not going to be 100% accurate. And that's absolutely right. I mean, I was in charge of all the translations from a technical side of the scriptures for the digital scriptures for a couple of years. And I know how complex translation is. And so there was a lot of concern. And so the whole purpose, or the whole thing that we were doing with the community really allowed the church the opportunity to review how they do translations. And because of this, they actually, or at least partially because of this, they actually have now developed policies around what type of content can we rely on the community to support and translate for us, and what type we can't. So for example, ensign talks and that kind of thing, conference talks the community doesn't translate. But technical documents, things like that, certainly it's great to have the community translate. So Wiki's been very successful for us. Go ahead and press the space bar. We have 4,365 pages, over 1,000 articles. We have 22,000, almost 23,000 members. And again, 100% community moderated. So bad stuff goes out there, our community is watching this, is cleaning it up. The church doesn't have to do anything. And again, the nice thing is, we've got all kinds of information out there on how to use different church technologies out there. And this also gave us a platform to develop all kinds of projects. So now, we had forums out there where people could come talk. We had a wiki where we could actually start talking about some of the projects we needed help with. Go ahead. Next thing we said, we need to have a project for people to actually work on. So one of the challenges at the church was we were incredibly centralized with all of our technology. All of our servers were not accessible from the community. All of our tools, everything was completely self-contained. And we needed to figure out how to open that up. But that's a big challenge, especially for a large organization like the church. So we said, let's go find a project that's kind of outside of the church infrastructure. And one of the big challenges is that a lot of the area offices in the world, they have computer needs, and it's very difficult for them to get time from church headquarters to develop those. And one of those computer needs was a project called the Child Protection Act. In Australia, it's the law that if you work with children, you have to be certified, not certified, but you have to register with the state that you live in. And basically, this means you go down and you fill out a form. And so, can you imagine, from a church's perspective, how hard it is to make sure everybody's registered? I mean, how many times are people called into the primary and the youth program, in and out, and every time a bishop goes to call somebody, he has to wonder, are they registered with the state? It was a real challenge for them. So they needed to have a system that tracked all these certifications. So I actually got a call one day from an area office, Paul Benalik, who is the area ICS manager down in Australia, and he says, we really need this project. Do you think this is something the community can help? I put a call out to the community, and we had about 10 people respond, and about 5 people really actively work on this project, which basically what it does is it allows all the stakes and the wards to track all their certifications. So in Australia, the church bought all the wards scanners. Then the bishop gets up, he can run reports, and he can say, here's everybody that hasn't got a certification, encourages the ward members to go out and get their certification, bring them to the ward. We scan them and enter them in, and then at any time we can make sure we have the certification. The state then can run certification reports, making sure that their wards have the proper certification, and even the area office, so it rolls all the way up. This project started in April or May of 2009. It was completed in November. And again, very little resources from the church. The only church resources they had was we actually figured out how we could tie into the membership data. And that was a big challenge because we didn't want to expose the real membership data to the community, so we had to set up a whole mock membership system for the community to work with. That product's been out since the end of 2009, and it's been very successful for Australia, and has helped them manage that project. That was one of our first projects that we released, and it showed that given the right circumstance, the right types of projects, the church could do a lot of great things. Go ahead. The next opportunity was in mobile. Mobile, as you guys know now that I've talked about it, has been one of my passions for years. I've been involved with the Palm when I was with Franklin and with the Easy Reader project, and has always been a passion to see the scriptures and other products come out there. So when they came to me and said, can we get some people to write some mobile apps? I didn't think that would be a problem at all. And so we went out, we first started with the Mormon channel. That was our first mobile app that was ever released. But we've since come out with Gospel Library, LDS Tools, several others. In fact, this last one Clean water is one we just released recently. It was done completely by the community. And that is kind of a private app, but basically the church has water wells all around the world. And they have to maintain these water wells and make sure that they're being properly managed by the local communities. So they have this big, huge questionnaire they go through. They do bacteria counts on the water. They make sure that the council that's in charge of the water wells actually functioning, and all this oversight that they want to do. They now send service missionaries out with iPhones, and they can go out there, they can make voice recordings, they can take pictures, they can fill out the whole data, and then transmit them back to a central server. That's clean water, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. We're doing a lot more with the mobile. It's pretty exciting to see. Go ahead and push tab. To give you some rough numbers, we've had over 1,992,000 downloads of the Gospel Library on the different platforms. 456,000 downloads of the Mormon Channel on the different platforms. 348, almost 349,000 of the LDS tools. Scripture Mastery, 70,000 almost. So they're very, very successful. And it's really interesting because we are getting them all over the world. In fact, just on the iPhone, we have over 60 countries where these are being downloaded from. So it's amazing. This is going all over the world, and people are using them. Go ahead. So we're now rolling pretty good with the LDS Tech stuff. We're doing a lot of really neat stuff with projects. We wanted to share what the enthusiasm is. Momentum's growing in the community, so we started a thing called the Lds Tech Blog. A guy by the name of Tom Johnson goes around and he basically interviews different people working inside the community or even church employees and posts these on the Lds Tech site. And this is great because it gives people the opportunity and the advantage to see kind of the everyday life of different people. And so if you go to the Lds Tech website, you'll be able to view a lot of these types of blogs and so forth. So the Lds Tech website. Lds Tech website went through a major transition about a year ago. And this transition enabled us to do some very cool things. For example, initially the Lds Tech website basically just had a few articles that we'd post every once in a while, but really pointed you to the forums and the wiki. But about a year ago, we released a version that did a tremendous amount of cool things around projects. So now the Lds Tech website allows you, as a person who wants to be involved, to log in, look at all the available projects that are out there, look at the skills that those projects are requiring, and then sign up for one of those projects. And then it allows the community to actually communicate through the Lds Tech website on the project. So you can do emails, and it automatically provisions accounts for the source code and for the tools, and it's a really cool thing. But it took us a while to get to that point. But it's now become the central place where people can go, they can see, okay, I have these skills, what projects could utilize my skills? An example is we have a lot of people that are not programmers. We have people that have project management skills, design skills, writing skills, people who just want to test the different projects. So they can actually come on. We even have translation skills. We'll say, well, we just did a project for the bishop's storehouses in Central and South America. And we needed those translated in Portuguese, Spanish, and Creole. So we found people that could speak those languages, and they came in, and they weren't programmers. They would just say, okay, this text here in this context should be changed to this. So we have a huge number of different types of skills. What's really neat about it is you can go on the site and you can look through the hundreds of skills and select which ones you have. And if you see a skill, or if you have a skill that's not on the list, you can actually add it. Because at the church, we don't know everybody's skill level and what kinds of skills they have. So when we started, we pre-populated it with maybe 20, 30 skills, and it's gone to about 150 skills, things that we didn't know about. But it's nice because now, as a church, if we say we have a need for some type of particular technology skill or whatever, we can query this database and we can find a list of volunteers. In fact, that's how we find people now for a lot of the projects. Somebody will come and say, I have this need, I need a BlackBerry app, and we can go and say, okay, show me everybody who's proficient in BlackBerry programming, and we can then blast out an email to them saying, we have a project if you're interested. So it works really well. Go ahead. So we have over 5,000 registered participants. We have 1,400 project participants. That's how many volunteers we have right now working on different things. 600 right now currently are actively engaged. So that's a tremendous, give you an idea, that's double the workforce at the ICS group at the church. So that's like doubling our workforce there. We have 45 active projects. Everything from, we did a cemetery project for Japan, we did this Bishop Storehouse project, we've done a recreation project to manage recreation properties. All these are being done by the community. So, as you can see, we're really starting to realize the vision of enlisting members of the church around the world. We then said, okay, the next step is we've got this community going pretty good. Let's actually start having development conferences. And we had our very first one in 2010. And go ahead and push it. Elder Bednar actually kicked off the conference for us. We had 200 people from around the world come. We had people from Europe, from Asia attend this conference. And on their own dime, fly in. The conference was free, so they could come. And the first day we had Elder Bednar, we had a lunch, and Elder Bednar spoke. And he basically called us digital pioneers. And his talk was awesome, great. And it got so, everybody's so excited. And then the second day, people just came to the church to our offices, and they basically broke up into different projects that they were interested in, and we spent the day working. And wildly successful, a lot of great community members, new community members came on board then. We learned a lot about hosting development conferences as well, what we could improve on. And so we've now had our second one this last spring, which we had almost, not quite twice the number of the first one, and was even more refined. So it's been a very successful thing, and we'll continue to have these in the future. It allows us to bring people from all over the world in, really focus them in on projects, learn their talents, listen to their input, and gather the information and start on projects. Go ahead. So, how do you get involved? First of all, we actually, since for the last about 4 or 5 months, on the first Friday of every month, we actually have an Lds Tech Service Day. In fact, today was an Lds Tech Service Day, and this is where volunteers can come to our offices in Riverton, and we provide a lunch, but they just work on a project with our teams internally at the church. Happens every month. Anybody can come. If whatever your skill sets are, we'll find a place to help you out there. This has been very successful. Sometimes the group's smaller, maybe 30 people. Sometimes it's larger. But the idea is that we're getting people come and engaged in helping us. People are taking time off their own busy schedule. It's really amazing to see the willingness of people to help. We have a brother that's blind, that's a designer, and he helps us design user interfaces for sight impaired individuals. And he comes and he participates and helps and says, okay, here's how you can design this to make it easier for the screen readers and the things that people need for blind. So we do this every month. Go ahead. We also have our starting Lds Tech chapters around the country. This will spread across the world, but initially around the country. We have about 10 or 11 chapters set up now, and we have new chapters being added every month. And these are basically self-organized by members of the church in their communities. So we have some in Utah, we have some in in Texas. I think there's one back, I don't know if it's in Atlanta area, but back in the south there's another one. In the Northwest. So they're springing up where there's a heavier concentration of tech people, but they'll spread out more. And the idea is that we'll support them, we'll help them to get off and running, and then they basically meet as often as they feel they can, and they'll use local ward houses to get together and work on different projects. Go ahead. And then the last thing we just started, and this was actually very enlightening for us. When we first started Lds Tech, we actually had people come to us and say, I'm a business owner and I really love what you're doing, and I will offer some of my employees' time to you to do whatever you want. So after 2 or 3 or 4 people started coming to us and offering us this, we've actually set up a project where we actually have Chad Fulmer here, as an employee of the church, and his job is he goes out and works with these people to set up these projects. So just in fact, recently we had a brother that owns a development shop over in the Philippines. And he says, I'm going to have my workers spend 1 day a week working on whatever you want them to work on. And so Chad will work with them and make sure that they are focused in doing what they're doing. What's neat about this is a lot of times they're not members of the church, the employees aren't. The owner is, and he says, I want you to work on this, and they donate that time. So that's kind of the latest thing that we're doing, and it's just starting, but we actually have 2 or 3 companies that are doing that already. So you can see we're really growing. There's a lot that's going on. It's been a tremendous ride. What's really most satisfying and most inspiring to me, though, is the testimony of the people that are doing this. No one's asked for any money. No one's asked. People just want to help. They donate their time. I mean, I had one lady that worked on the Bishop's Storehouse. She grabbed that project, spent, she was not working at the time, and so she spent almost full time for 3 or 4 months working on the Bishop's Storehouse, organizing and doing. She did most of the project management and a lot of the coding. And then she organized with brothers in South America and Central America for translations and coding and reports. It's just tremendous to see their effort. It's also really gratifying to see how it blesses the church. And in fact, a lot of times when we have specific needs, we've actually turned to these community members, and we've actually hired several of them. So it's been a great recruiting tool for us to find talented people who have that passion and want to see the church succeed. The LDS Tech community has been a blessing in my life too, because it's really showed me what people want to do and how they want to contribute to the church without thought for themselves. And it's really quite amazing. In fact, when I first started, everybody said, you won't get any support for some of these weird projects. People only want to work on what they want to work on. And I really believed that wasn't true. Yes, we have more people working on some of the fun projects like Gospel Library, but the reality is the team that did the Child Protection Act or the Bishop's Storehouse are never going to use that product for themselves. And they did that completely out of dedication and willingness to serve. When I was, I've always thought for years, throughout my career, I've always thought, I would love to do something where my church service was in my field that I work in. It seems like we're always called to do things that we're not good at. I mean, Scoutmaster or some calling that maybe you're not good at. And those are good. It stretches you and grows. But you always wanted to say, could I do something for the church that I'm good at? And so I've always felt it would be so neat to be able to do that. And that's what LDS Tech, and that's what drove my passion and my desire to see this succeed. We have a team now that's dedicated to doing this. I've moved on off this project now, and the brother that's doing this now is managing this is Alan Smoot, doing an absolutely fantastic job taking this to the next level and organizing it and organizing the community members. Anyway, it's been my privilege and pleasure to work on this so far and to be involved. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yeah?
Yeah, how do you decide what to keep sort of in-house versus what to push out on LDS Tech?
Great question. That was one of the biggest challenges we had early on, was how do we expose certain types of programs to community that may be of a sensitive nature? And I don't mean sensitive in the things that's secret. I'm talking just membership data, or things like that. It was a real tough struggle for probably 2 years. So what we did initially is we started with things that were completely outside of the church already. For example, Mormon Channel, Gospel Library, no sensitive data there, no sensitive topics. Child Protection Act was a project that Australia was going to go to a contractor for. So we were able to do that. So the initial criteria was take projects that didn't need a lot of internal church resources, because they just weren't made available at the time. As we've become to trust the community more, we've developed some of the tools and the safeguards and have exposed a lot of that. So we now have mock membership services, mock leadership services that the community can actually use. But actually how we decide is partially based on the complexity and design and what's necessary to understand the technology. For example, it's really hard for us to outsource some of the things that are really, really complex from an internal infrastructure and security nature. But almost everything else can go outsourced, especially a lot of the tools that we as members use. So anything on the mobile, outsourced. Anything like recreation properties, young men, young women apps, tracking duty to God, those kinds of things can actually go to the community to be developed. I don't know if I answered your question. It's a little bit of a judgment call. In fact, we have this little flow chart that whenever a project comes in, we go through a series of questions and say to identify whether it's a good community project or not. Timeline is also an issue. The community, although they're great, they can't work. I mean, we all have jobs, we all have church callings and families, and so sometimes the community projects can take a little longer. So if it's not real-time critical, that's a good indicator that it'd go community.
It seems that the task of managing the look and feel and the logistics of these sites would be nearly impossible.
That's the challenge. It is. So we actually have a team of designers that are specifically dedicated to community, and they act as art directors. So they'll go and they'll say, okay, we give you some style guides, here's what we want you to follow, and so forth like that. That was a challenge though, absolutely. Other questions? Yeah.
Do you know anything about the timing or how they're working with the MLS that's being available on LDS.org, the leadership resources? They were going to put the Elders Quorum Presidents Relief Societies and the home teaching statistics and things off of MLS onto there. They've been saying they're going to do that for a number of months. Do you have any information on timing with that?
I don't. And even if I did, they don't like to share it because then people get upset when it doesn't meet the time frame. But I know they've been working on it for actually years. And that's one of those things they really can't farm out because there are sensitive things that deal with, what bishops have to deal with and welfare and so forth, and Relief Society presidents, Elders Quorum presidents. So there are some things there that they're working on. The goal forever has been when you log in, we know who you are, and then we can give you an experience that is, with what your calling would be. So I know that they have started rolling some of those out with some of the bishops' tools.
Well, there's a lot of stuff out there now. I mean, there's a huge amount. I'm just interested in the last little pieces that aren't there.
Yeah, those will take a little bit longer, but yes, they're working on it. They have a team of people that do nothing but this kind of stuff, but it just takes a while to get it in place. Other questions? Well, it's my privilege to be here today with you. I am thankful for the opportunity. I'm glad Tom called, even though I'm not smart like you guys here. I can barely tie my shoes sometimes, but it's been my pleasure. And I just wanted to take an opportunity to bear my testimony and just let you know how gratified I am and how thankful I am to our Heavenly Father and for the visionary of our leaders, the prophet and the apostles, and their willingness to see how this would all work. It has strengthened my testimony in so many ways to see the willingness and the dedication of people to help the church for nothing other than to help the church. I say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Tom, thank you so much. That was really great. I think it's just amazing over the last few years how many different ways the church allows us to contribute, and that we can find ways that match our abilities and our interests, and as well as stretch us a little bit. My wife, I'm looking somewhere not too far in the future at maybe retiring. My wife wonders what I was going to do, and as I've looked at some of the needs on LDS Tech, I said, well, if I learn this language and this language and this language, then I can spend my time programming. She says, well, that'll keep you out of trouble, so go right ahead. Well, thanks again. Let's give Tom Welch another hand. Well, thank you very much for coming tonight. We'll have John Hedengren, who's a member of the Alumni Board, and also the newest faculty for the Chemical Engineering Department, give us our closing prayer. We're not going to chase anybody out. If you want to socialize for a minute, that's great, but really appreciate you coming tonight. Thank you.